The night was ordinary. Radar screens were clean. No enemy fighters in the air. No surface-to-air missiles lighting up. No threats of any kind that the most sophisticated avionics ever built could detect. And yet, somewhere above the Middle East, the pilots of the most expensive combat aircraft in human history were flying toward coordinates that did not exist. They had no idea. Their instruments said everything was fine. Their weapon systems were calculating. Their navigation was running clean. And when they released their bombs, those bombs flew perfectly, guided by precision technology costing hundreds of millions of dollars, straight into empty dirt. Not because of enemy fire, not because of pilot error, because someone hundreds of kilometers away was whispering lies into the ears of their aircraft, and the aircraft believed every single word. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through is not theory. This is not speculation from someone reading headlines. This is the operational reality of what happened when Israel's F-35 fleet flew into an active war zone and came back having achieved almost nothing, and why the governments in Tel Aviv and Washington are working overtime to make sure that full story never assembles itself in front of you. Let me start with something that almost nobody in mainstream coverage explains properly, and that is what the F-35 actually is beneath the marketing language. When Lockheed Martin sells this aircraft, they sell it as a fifth-generation stealth fighter. They talk about sensor fusion, about low observable coatings, about the integrated avionics package that makes the pilot the most situationally aware human being in any combat theater. All of that is real. All of that is genuinely impressive engineering. But underneath all of it, beneath the stealth and the sensors and the trillion-dollar supply chain that keeps this aircraft flying, there is a dependency so fundamental, so deeply embedded into every system this aircraft runs, that removing it does not degrade the F-35, it paralyzes it. That dependency is GPS. The global positioning system is not a feature on the F-35. It is not an option you can switch on and off. It is the spine of the aircraft's entire combat function. Navigation runs on GPS. Weapons delivery runs on GPS. Strike corridor calculation runs on GPS. Formation coordination runs on GPS. Every single thing that makes this aircraft more than just an expensive flying object depends on the aircraft knowing with certainty exactly where it is and exactly where its targets are. And that certainty comes from GPS, which means if you can corrupt GPS, you do not need to shoot down an F-35. You just need to make it stop trusting reality. Iran figured this out. And then Iran spent 15 years building the tool to exploit it. To understand what Iran actually did, you need to understand the difference between two things that sound similar but are operationally worlds apart. The first is jamming. Jamming is the blunt instrument of electronic warfare. You flood the GPS frequency with noise. You overwhelm the receiver and the aircraft's systems flag an anomaly. Alerts go off. Pilots go to backup protocols. The mission is degraded, but the crew knows something is wrong. They can adapt. They can compensate. Jamming is detectable, and detectable problems have solutions. What Iran used was not jamming. What Iran used was spoofing. And spoofing is something else entirely. Spoofing means you do not block the real GPS signal. You replace it. You inject false positioning data into the receiver with enough precision and enough signal fidelity that every system aboard the aircraft accepts the false data as genuine. The navigation suite reads clean. The weapons computers calculate cleanly. No warnings, no flags, no alerts. The pilot sees nominal readings across every display. Everything looks exactly the way it should look when everything is working. What the pilot cannot see, what nothing aboard the aircraft will tell him, is that every coordinate his systems are processing has been silently, invisibly, precisely replaced with a fabricated lie. His aircraft thinks it is somewhere it is not. His weapons think they are being guided to targets that are not there. And when those weapons release, they follow the false coordinates with mechanical perfection and hit empty ground. The infrastructure Iran built to execute this was not improvised. It was not a few technicians in a basement with commercial hardware. Iranian electronic warfare teams deployed a distributed network of mobile spoofing transmitters spread across western Iran, parts of eastern Syria, and the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. Multiple platforms, overlapping coverage zones, creating a seamless bubble of corrupted GPS signal extending deep into the operational airspace where Israeli aircraft were running strike missions. The network did not need to destroy anything. It did not need to get close to the aircraft. It only needed to shift the truth by a few hundred meters, consistently, invisibly, and at scale. And that is exactly what it did. The results were not ambiguous. Precision-guided munitions released by Israeli F-35s during the initial strike wave tracked their false coordinates with flawless fidelity and struck empty terrain. Mission commanders watching real-time impact data understood within minutes that something was catastrophically wrong. The weapons were performing perfectly. They were just destroying the wrong ground. And by the time abort orders reached the active strike packages, multiple sorties had already completed their release sequences. The bombs had already fallen. The false coordinates had already done their work. Then, after the spoofing phase had already done its damage, Iran activated the second phase, broadband GPS jamming across the same zone. Now the signal denial was open and undeniable. Israeli systems flagged the interference. Air Command faced an immediate binary choice: continue strike operations using degraded inertial navigation with significantly reduced accuracy, or stand down and accept the operational cost. The answer was stand down. F-35 sorties were curtailed. Strike missions were postponed. The aircraft that Israel has treated as the cornerstone of its regional military power was pulled back from the zone where its GPS dependency had turned it from an asset into a liability. Israel did not lose a single aircraft that night. What it lost was harder to replace than aircraft. It lost certainty. And in modern air warfare, certainty is not a comfort. It is a prerequisite. Without it, nothing works the way the doctrine says it should. Now here is the question that changes everything. And it is the question that defense ministries in every major capital are sitting with right now behind closed doors. How did Iran, a nation under comprehensive international sanctions, denied Western microelectronics, cut off from global defense supply chains, develop GPS denial capability sophisticated enough to disrupt fifth-generation fighter operations in a live combat environment? The answer to that question requires going back to a single day in 2011 that the United States would very much like history to forget. In December of 2011, an American RQ-170 Sentinel reconnaissance drone, one of the most classified surveillance platforms in the U.S. inventory, went missing over Iranian airspace. The official American explanation was that it malfunctioned and crashed. The truth, which emerged gradually through Iranian statements, technical analysis, and eventually through the uncomfortable silence of American officials who stopped contradicting the Iranian account, was something else. Iranian engineers had executed a GPS spoofing attack. They had convinced the drone's navigation system that it was on approach to its home base in Afghanistan. The drone had descended, following its falsified coordinates with complete confidence, and landed itself gently inside Iranian territory. American operators had watched the telemetry and could not understand what they were seeing. The drone was gone, intact, on the other side of the border. What Iranian reverse engineering teams found inside that drone became the foundation of everything that followed. They had direct physical access to an American military GPS receiver. They could see the signal processing architecture. They could study the authentication protocols, the fidelity thresholds, the exact technical parameters that military GPS systems use to decide whether an incoming signal is real or false. That knowledge, extracted from a single captured aircraft, gave Iranian engineers the blueprint for building spoofing systems specifically calibrated against American military GPS hardware, and they built it. Over the next decade, with the patience of engineers who understood that they were working on a timeline of years and not months, the IRGC's Electronic Warfare Command constructed what analysts now describe as a layered GPS denial architecture: mobile, distributed, redundant, and specifically optimized against the authentication protocols used by American and Israeli military systems. One more detail that is important and that almost no mainstream coverage includes. While Israeli F-35s were flying through a bubble of false coordinates, Iranian forces on the ground were navigating and targeting using Russian GLONASS and Chinese Beidou satellite positioning. The asymmetry of that situation is almost too stark to state calmly. Iran was seeing clearly. Israel was flying blind. And Iran had engineered exactly that asymmetry deliberately, through years of preparation, because it understood that the only realistic way to challenge the most expensive and most sophisticated air force it would ever face was to attack, not the aircraft themselves, but the invisible infrastructure those aircraft depended on. Find the dependency. Attack the dependency. The platform becomes irrelevant. The strategic consequences of what happened extend far beyond the immediate operational situation over Israel. Israel's entire military doctrine is constructed around one foundational requirement, which is speed. A nation of 9 million people with no strategic depth, a concentrated civilian population, and adversaries on multiple borders cannot fight long wars of attrition. Every conflict must resolve quickly and decisively, on terms that restore deterrence before the next round begins. The instrument that makes this possible has always been air power. Israel's Air Force is not simply a military branch. It is the mechanism by which a small nation projects decisive force across a region that surrounds it on every side. For that mechanism to work, Israeli aircraft must strike with confidence. When they cannot, when pilots cannot trust their navigation data, when weapons systems cannot trust their targeting coordinates, when mission commanders reviewing debrief data cannot be certain what their aircraft actually hit, the entire rapid, decisive warfare architecture that has underwritten Israeli security for 70 years begins to break down. Iran did not just disrupt a handful of strike missions. Iran attacked the operational premise that those missions are built on. That is a different category of damage. Hardware you can replace. Doctrine once compromised takes far longer to rebuild, and the adversaries who force that compromise are not pausing while the rebuilding happens. Consider the specific tactical situation that this creates. Hezbollah's rocket and missile campaigns from Lebanon continue. Iranian-supplied precision weapons continue reaching Israeli territory, and here is the detail that reveals how deliberate this entire strategy was. The weapons Hezbollah uses, the missiles Iran has provided to its proxy forces throughout the region, are designed with inertial guidance and terrain-referenced positioning systems. They do not rely on GPS. Iranian weapons designers built their export weapons to function inside exactly the kind of GPS-contested environment that Iran has now demonstrated it can create. Israel is absorbing fire from weapons that do not need GPS, while its primary response tool is grounded by an adversary who attacked its GPS dependency. That is not a coincidence. That is a weapons procurement and electronic warfare strategy 15 years in the making, executing precisely as designed. Washington's deeper fear is not the immediate tactical picture over Israeli airspace. Washington's fear is the question that every serious defense analyst in every adversary capital is now asking with renewed urgency. If Iran can do this, what can Russia do? What can China do? The American way of war since Operation Desert Storm in 1991 has been built on a single foundational concept, which is precision. GPS-guided munitions replaced mass bombing. Network-centric warfare replaced platform-independent operations. The F-35, the B-2, the entire family of precision-guided weapons in the American arsenal, every piece of it carries one embedded assumption, the assumption that GPS works. Mission planning software assumes GPS. Joint Terminal Attack Controller Coordination assumes GPS. The integrated joint warfare architecture that makes American military power lethal across multiple simultaneous theaters assumes that the positioning data flowing through every connected system is trustworthy. Iran just proved operationally in a live combat environment against real fifth-generation aircraft. That assumption is not guaranteed. Russia has been developing GPS denial capability for years. The evidence from Ukraine is consistent. Russian electronic warfare teams routinely degrade GPS accuracy for Ukrainian drone operations and precision weapons delivery. Chinese electronic warfare investment is arguably more sophisticated than anything Iran has deployed and has been sustained at a scale Iran could never match. North Korea has demonstrated GPS disruption capability that has affected civilian aviation in South Korea on multiple documented occasions. The question of who else can execute GPS denial against American forces and American-supplied platforms is not a question with a reassuring answer, and this is precisely why the Pentagon's response has been institutional silence. Acknowledging publicly that Iran has developed GPS denial capability sufficient to disrupt F-35 strike operations forces every nation that purchased American fifth-generation aircraft to ask what they actually paid for. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Poland, nations whose entire defense planning depends on F-35 performance in a contested electromagnetic environment, begin asking questions that American defense contractors are not positioned to answer. The international market for American military technology faces consequences that extend far beyond this conflict and far beyond this region. The silence is not confusion, it is calculation. The Gulf states are already running their own calculations. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, governments that have spent decades building military capacity around American platforms and American technological guarantees are looking at the Iranian demonstration and reassessing whether those investments provide the security that was implicit in the procurement decisions. Back-channel conversations between Gulf capitals and Tehran that have been operating at low intensity for months are reportedly accelerating. Gulf leaders are watching a regional power shift that Iran appears to be winning not through superior aircraft or superior missiles, but through superior understanding of where the modern battlefield is actually being fought. And the answer to that question is not in the sky, it is in the electromagnetic spectrum. Whoever controls the spectrum, whoever can use it freely while denying it to an adversary, holds the operational initiative in any modern conflict. Iran just demonstrated that control of the spectrum is not the exclusive property of nations with large defense budgets and advanced manufacturing bases. The F-35s will fly again. Emergency anti-jam receiver upgrades are being accelerated. Alternative navigation protocols using inertial systems and terrain reference positioning are being pushed to operational squadrons. Some of this will restore partial effectiveness in the near term, but partial is not full, and the Israeli Air Force now knows, and knows that Iran knows, that its GPS dependency is a documented, operationally exploited vulnerability. Every mission profile built around GPS-guided precision delivery requires reassessment. Every strike package that uses GPS waypoint navigation needs alternative protocols stress-tested against a spoofing scenario. This is not a revision at the margins of Israeli air doctrine. It is a comprehensive rethinking of how the Israeli Air Force fights. That rethinking takes months. The adversaries it needs to fight are not pausing for months. What Iran wrote over the Middle East that night is not a footnote to this conflict. It is a manual. And that manual is already being read in Moscow, in Beijing, in Pyongyang, in every capital where a government is working to understand how to effectively challenge an adversary that outspends it by a factor of 10. The lesson is not complicated. Find the dependency. Attack the dependency. The most expensive military machine in human history will malfunction. The age of GPS-dependent air superiority did not end in a dogfight. It did not end with a missile lock or a shoot-down or a dramatic aerial engagement that television cameras could capture. It ended in silence, in the invisible gap between where an F-35 believed it was and where it actually was. Iran put that gap there. And closing it, restoring the certainty that Israeli and American air doctrine depends on, will take far longer than any government involved is prepared to say out loud.